So the 606 is more affordable classic Roland drum machine. It's fully analog. It looks and is the same size as a TB303, and it sounds really quite jolly. It's a bit like an 808. Part of the idea that I had was showing you all different ways that you can improve the sound of the TR-606. I've got all these boxes here that you can kind of wire up to it in different ways and make different drum sounds and make it do swing and all kinds of other things. First drum machine I bought was a TR-606, and somewhere on the internet there is a video of me standing outside a shopping mall in Oxford with the artist Alexandre Singh, and we were performing Christmas carols and we were dressed as Kraftwerk, and I'm just sort of standing there operating the 606 with various different beats and stuff. And I actually used it on my first big chiptune hit called Fuck You Management Wanker. Then I traded the 606 because I was a student at the time. I didn't have very much money, and I got the 707, which I preferred. But I did miss having a 606. So I picked another one up, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. And here it is. I'll just play a beat so you can kind of hear what's going on. Now the 606 definitely, it's more of a happy jolly sound than like an aggressive techno sound, but it is affordable and it is cool. Let's go through the different individual sounds. First of all, the kick drum. It's not the greatest kick drum. There is some stuff you can do to it with compression and stuff, but as it comes out the box, it's really not that great. But the snare drum is already better. It's a lot like an 808 snare. It's very electro. It's already kind of telling a good story. Then we have the toms. There's a low and a high tom, and I never use toms very much in my tracks anyway, but they're there and they sound nice. The toms have a special function on the 606, which is they have trigger outs. So the special thing on the 606 with the toms is that the low and the high tom have a trigger out, which is brilliant because I never use the toms, so I can use them for triggers. And on all other drum machines, they use the rim shot or some other instrument that I actually like, so I can't then use the trigger. But on the 606, it's perfect. I don't care about the toms, so we've got triggers there. The next instrument along is the cymbal. Which is kind of like a ride cymbal. It's quite nice. And the pièce de résistance of the 606 is the hi-hats, which are my favorite sounding hi-hats of all time, really. Those are big words, but they do sound good. They're very clear, they're very electro, and they work brilliantly. If you trigger the open and closed hi-hat at the same time, you get a third type of hi-hat sound. Right, so that is the closed hi-hat. This is the open. But if you play them both at the same time, on the 808 and the 909, if you do that, it just overrides with the open hi-hat. Although there are nice sounds, it does kind of sound jolly and not like a tough electro drum machine. But I'm going to show you all how you can make the 606 great. So the first thing that works really well on the 606, and what I used in my song, Fuck You Management Wanker, it takes distortion really, really well. So I'm going to crank up the gain on this mixer and we'll play the same beat. Every distortion that I've tried through the 606 sounded good. I've installed separate outs for each drum sound, and that means that I can treat them separately. So what I like to use that for, first of all, is the kick drum, because then I can do some separate processing on the kick drum and make it sound a bit fatter. Kick drum's now coming through a separate channel where I've boosted the bass, cut the mids and added a bit of treble. I'm going to add a bit of distortion just to the kick drum. And I can add some reverb to the rest of the sounds. A lot of people say that Mr. Wazzo used a 606 for some of that flat beat track, and it does kind of sound like it when you listen to it. It sounds a bit like a 606. There are 32 patterns, so there's 16 patterns in 2 groups. And the 606 also has another feature that no other Roland drum machine has, and that's that you can switch between playing your pattern and writing the pattern while it's actually playing. So it's really good for live jams. I wanted to show you the hand clap to get those fat claps. There's 2 trigger outs on the 606 that come from the toms. So I'm plugging this patch cable into the high tom, and that goes into the external input of the clap. If you smash this pad on the clap, it gives you the clap sound, so you can hit it with a drumstick or whatever, but there is an external input, so you can trigger it with other things, like the 606. So let's talk about what you can do with this hand clap. There's 2 controls, one which is called sensitivity, which is mostly for when you're whacking it with a drumstick. You can make it more or less sensitive to when you tap it. And there's a control here called dry, which kind of adjusts the pitch. And there's a control called hall, which adds kind of a fake sounding reverb, but it's quite nice. So this is the dry control. As you can hear, it's adjusting the pitch of the clap. And now I'll bring in up and down the hall. Let's plug in one of the other boxes. This one here, which looks a bit like the hand clap. This is the Boss percussion synthesizer. And actually, the company Racket have done a clone of this Boss percussion synthesizer, and it's called the Racket Drum Synth. And it sounds exactly the same. It's quite a lot more flimsy, but it's got all the sound, and it's really cheap. So check that out. It works on the same principle. You can whack it with a stick, or you can trigger it from externally from another drum machine or something. So this has like a whole range of sounds that you can play. Let me just mess around with some of the controls, and you'll hear what it does. So I've got it set to make like a chiptune sound at the moment. Let me switch off the arpeggiation effect on it. Effectively, what it gives you is like a sort of a ping. You can make the ping short or long, and you can make it go up, an upwards ping or a downwards ping. I'll just show you that. That sounds a bit dub, which I quite like. And you can change the overall pitch of it. So you can kind of make space toms and all kind of other sci-fi sounds, but it has a LFO on that you can use to make kind of weird FM drums as well. So I'll bring that in, and you can hear what it does. And this is where this unit starts to get really good. Really sci-fi sounds. There's a switch on the back where you can change the wave shape of the LFO. At the moment I've got it on square wave because that's much more chip tune and that's what I'm about. But you can also have it on a triangle as well, and I'll show you that. So that is the Boss percussion synth. Not my favorite one of these boxes, but it is very, very cool. I'd love to see someone use that in a chiptune show. I bet someone like Jellica could do that. The Electro Harmonix crash pad. There's a button that you can press to trigger the drum, or you can trigger it from the 606 just with a jack. Now this box is supposed to create hi-hats and cymbal sounds like the crash pad is like for crash cymbal, really. At the moment I've kind of got it playing a high Q sort of zap. I'll take you through all the controls. So the reason why it sounds like that is I've got the resonance turned up. If I turn it down, you can hear that it's already sounding quite a lot more like a cymbal. So the first two controls are the sweep. So you can state the start frequency. So if you want it high and going low, you put the start high and the stop low. Like that. But you can go the other way as well. You can have it starting low and going higher. You can set the decay length of the sound. It's definitely sounding a bit more like a hi-hat now. And you can say as well that's the decay length, and there's also the decay time. But you'll hear the difference more when I start to bring in the resonance, which I'll do now. You can definitely hear the filter sweeping there. It's going from low to high, and it's got quite a long time that it does that over. You can make it shorter or longer. And it sounds absolutely now nothing like a crash cymbal at all, not that it really did. Anyway, what I like to use this for is high Q zap sounds, like the Egyptian lover used to use. Something like that. So I'll plug it into the 606 now, so the 606 will trigger the crash pad. So that's another option for your trigger outputs on your TR-606. The next one is a bit more of a high-tech sounding bit of kit. The Jomox Mbase 11. And what this is the big guns, really. It is a kick drum synth. And it will sort out the problem that people have with the 606, that it doesn't have an aggressive sounding kick drum, because this thing sounds absolutely immense. Just like all of these, there's a button where you can trigger it. And there's an example of one of the sounds. But there's a whole bunch of settings. What I'm going to do though is trigger it from the kick drum of the 606. Now this thing has a bunch of features where you can change the sound. It will be too difficult to explain everything that this does on the stream, but I'll go through some of the presets for the kick drum so you can get a flavor for the type of sounds it makes. You can do really cool sounding basses as well. Loads of low end on that kick. That's quite a nice one. And distortion for that gabber sound. I think that gives you a feel for the time being, and I'm going to put this to the side because I want to show you the last expansion to the 606 that I've got lined up. Now what this box is Roland's SBX-1 sync box, and it generates MIDI clock, and it generates analog DIN sync as well for things like the 606 or any of those vintage Roland drum machines. And it's also got things like a CV gate converter and stuff like that. So I've changed the 606 to be the tempo slave now, so it's slaved to this sync box. So if I press play on this, it will play the 606. And you're thinking, so what? Well, this thing has an absolutely killer feature, which is that it will give the 606 or anything you connect to it at shuffle as well. I'll bring some of that in now. This is without shuffle. pretty straight, and I'll bring in the shuffle. Solid, isn't it? If you take out that lame kick, use an external kick sound, or process the kick, add a bit of shuffle from a box like this. There's other alternatives as well. And then you get the really great sounds, that snare, those really nice hi-hats. It's great. I'm going to do a house pattern, I think. It's very easy on the 606 to make a beat because you can switch between the play and the write modes, as I say, while it's running. And I'm going to try and create for you like a house pattern. So I'll put the accent on quarter notes, and I'll put a kick drum on quarter notes as well, and a snare. And now I'm going to do a hi-hat shuffly thing. Going into play mode, selecting the other pattern, going back into write mode. And going back into play mode, and then I can do a chain of both of the patterns that I've created. I think it would be nice with the hand clapper as well. All right, so the clap is on the high tom. So I'm going to edit the high tom while it's playing. That is how you can make your 606 a lot more interesting. Add swing with an external box like this Roland SBX-1, but there's other things that will give you a swing. And use those trigger outs to trigger some cool external percussion modules like this hand clapper or this kick drum synth. And when you have it like that, to be honest, you've got the great sounding snare and cymbals on the 606. You don't really need an 808 or a 909. If anything, I would say this setup is better because you've got the ability to switch between play and write on the 606. You've got more control over your clap and these things. Are there any 606 clones? Yes, there are. There's some really good ones as well. Behringer have a RD6, which is super cheap. And the RD6 also has a clap sound built in, so you don't need to use an external hand clap. Roland also has a clone called the TR-606, which is, I think, quite interesting that they chose to make that, because the 606 isn't considered a super rare classic machine. They're still quite affordable. But the great thing about that TR-6 is that it has even more trigger outs on it than the original does. It's also got trigger outs for bass drum and snare drum, and it still has trigger outs for the low and high tom, and it also has a trigger out for the accent. So if you're into your drum machine having loads of trigger outs, that is definitely the one to go for. Thanks everyone for joining the stream. It's great to see you. Hope to see you all next week.